Hello and welcome to another midweek reflection and challenge and conversation starter and time filler. Though there have been requests for me to do it under 10 minutes, so I will endeavour to do my best, but we'll see. So it's been another significant week in the life of our nation with the effects and ongoing dialogue about how we respond to the pandemic, but also the anger and the grief and the protests that have been shared following George Floyd's death in America. We will be reflecting on those in the sermons over the coming weeks, on our response to prejudice, about where it comes from, what the Bible says about it, what we can do to challenge it. And we've also got a Justice and Peace meeting for St David's Uniting Church on Friday. So if you've got any further thoughts on how we can address this issue, how we can speak out against injustice as a church, then please feel free to send them to me or to speak to your elder, or if you know someone else who's in the Justice and Peace group. All are welcome to the meeting. Friday at 4 o'clock. Again, email me if you want more details, and you can come along. But yes, we will continue our reflections on that as we go on. But we also need, especially of many of us who have the ups and downs of the lockdown, who are on the Corona coaster, as it's called. We also do sometimes need reasons to smile. And so we had last week's challenge, which was in acknowledgement that apparently we're only wearing 3% of our clothing at the moment. So I challenged us to take photographs of ourselves wearing clothes that we don't normally wear at this time, and perhaps doing an interesting activity. Some of you have responded, less so than the haiku, I get why. But for now, Bethan, if you can show the gallery, off you go. Weren't they incredible? I think good effort to everyone who was involved in that. I loved the outfits and the photos, and I think maybe when we can physically gather again as a church, we should reprise them. We should give them a second viewing. I'm very tempted to get that lion outfit out again, maybe with a dog collar. So thanks for everyone for participating in that. This week's one, then. This week's challenge is more of a wordy one than a visual one, because a lot of people have been reflecting upon where hate and violence and prejudice comes from. No one is born with those views. So inevitably, it's something we pick up from our society, from our community, from our families. And I was listening to a podcast recently that was exploring this. It was one by Nadia Bowles-Weber, the Lutheran pastor that I'm a big fanboy of. And she was interviewing a woman who is called, there it is, Megan Phelps Roper, who was a member of the Westboro Baptist Church. You might remember this church was often in the headlines or on TV. Louis Theroux did a couple of documentaries about them a few years ago. They were the right-wing, incredibly conservative, mostly of one family church in America that would do stunts like picket soldiers' funerals, basically saying they were pleased that they had died. It was their prayer that more would die, because that death was God's punishment on the country for the lack of morality, in particular for the growing acceptance of homosexuality in America. Completely hate-filled theology, antithetical to the teachings of Jesus and the good news of the gospel. But this is what this Megan had been taught all her life by her family, princes of God, but who then twisted those with that dark and prejudiced theology. So how did she then move from that to realizing, to awakening to the fact that their outlook, their faith was something to step away from? How did she have the wisdom and the courage to move away from her family, her support network, everything that she'd been brought up knowing, to say that this isn't right? In some ways, it's no surprise that it was empathy, an awakening empathy and human compassion that helped her question and ultimately reject the worldview that she was taught. She talks about seeing an image of a child in Africa dying from malnutrition, and when previously their theology would say that that's another death, that's another someone punished from God for the world's sins. And yet when Megan saw that child, she didn't see an individual who was being punished by an angry God. She saw a child of God. She saw a sister of Christ, her fellow kin. So her views began to soften. And then it was the empathy of other people towards Megan that changed her even more. As an organization that believed that the world was full of hate and was sinful and broken, when they received hate, when they received comments and communication, especially in social media, telling them how wrong they were, wishing them death threats, all of this kind of thing, that validated them. But it was when people showed her basic human compassion, showed her a bit of empathy online, saying it must be hard to be brought up in that family, asking her how she felt receiving such vitriol, all of those kind of things, that she started thinking, well, if these people I've been told are nothing but depraved, if they're showing me some human compassion and empathy, maybe this whole artifice, this theology of hate that's been built up, there's something wrong about it. And so eventually she left the church and now speaks about the importance of listening to the other, of having empathy. Of course, empathy is central to our faith. I think it's foundational to society. I think it's something that we can often lack. It's the key to why we frequently and all too readily judge one another. One of the recommendations that was in last week's reflection, thinking about the George Floyd death, was to look at the blue eyes, green eyes experiment, and the teacher who first came up with that the day after the death, the assassination of Martin Luther King. And they were going to pray as a class. They were going to pray the Native American, Indigenous American prayer of "O Divine Spirit." I'm paraphrasing here. I think it goes, "O Divine Spirit, let me not judge another before I've walked a mile in their moccasins." That idea of trying to have empathy with someone else. Well, according to this big, thick book, some of which, a page of which I've read, Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature. According to this book, one of the reasons why the world is, would you believe it, less violent than ever before is because of empathy. And he convincingly argues that one of the reasons for a rise in empathy as human civilization progresses is the invention of the book, the novel, works of fiction, and then eventually the film, because they enable us to have a window into the lives of completely different people, whether that's a different gender, a different nationality, sexuality, religious position, whatever it might be. In reading, immersing ourselves in someone else's story, we can see the world ever so slightly, or glimpse what the world might look like for them. Which is why Oliver Twist was said to be key in the call to improve the conditions of the workhouse, and Uncle Tom's Cabin in America was cited as having a pivotal role in persuading the American people to reject slavery. Stories can change the world. Ultimately, Our faith is about stories, true stories, mythical stories, some, but stories that can change the world, that contain truth in it to change the world. It won't surprise you then that I'm jumping to films then. But as Steven Pinker says, films can change the way we see the world, can teach us something about what it is to have empathy for others. And there's so many examples of this. And the film Philadelphia, more kind of fairly recently in the 90s, helped many countries question their view on how they treated those who were HIV positive. And some certain changes in law in America were said to have come about because of the impact of that film. A short film about killing. Oh, this one. It's not a laugh a minute, but this film, Polish film, yeah, good. It's been a while since I've watched it. Is said it is what it says. It's about a brutal murder, and then he suffers. He is killed by the state through capital punishment because of it. That film is cited by many as the reason why Poland changed its stance and no longer has capital punishment. There are others. A short film about killing, which I think I've lent to Viviane, is one of the most brutal films to ever watch, but is probably the most powerful film I've ever seen. It's a story that retells some of the of a guy called Anwar, his killings in Indonesia, where he said it was said in a genocide that killed over 1 million people, that he personally killed 1,000 of them. And in the film, he retells the killings in incredibly bizarre ways, through musicals, through westerns, through his love of film. And in the retelling of his story, you see him begin to realize exactly what it is he has done. That's quite an extreme version of it. A far more upbeat version, Bambi. Apparently, I've read statistics that suggested that after the release, the widespread release of Bambi, in America, hunting licenses, or deer hunting licenses certainly, went down by as much as 50%. They watched the film, they had some kind of empathy across species for Bambi, and they decided that their hobby, or there were other hobbies to do. So, the challenge for this week then is for you to suggest a film to watch which might open up others to seeing the world in a different way, which might inspire or teach something about empathy, which can help us look at the world from a different position other than our own. So I've got just a couple, and then I'll finish. I might be within the 10 minutes, I don't know. Because these are on at the moment. A Monster Calls, we've watched this film in church, but the play is available for 2 more days on the Old Vic website, Bristol Old Vic, or if you go on YouTube and type in Old Vic, A Monster Calls, you can see the play, which was outstanding. And it looks at grief and the after effects of it, which I think is a beautiful play. I'm just mentioning that because that's out only until the end of Thursday. I would suggest Sitting in Limbo. Many of you would have watched this film. It was on BBC One, a TV film, all about the Windrush scandal. I watched it last night, and I must confess I poured a drink afterwards because it was frustrating, depressing, infuriating to watch. Did I say infuriating twice there? I may have done. But it's an important watch, and I think we're very apposite for everything else that's going on at the moment, and the reminder that racism doesn't just exist in America, that we have issues of our own, a very particular British racism to address. Those are some heavy ones. You don't have to go down the heavy route. Paddington 2. I mean, if anyone can teach us about human compassion and empathy and seeing the world in a different, far more hopeful way, it's Paddington. So, I think I've rambled long enough now. Challenge for this week then. Suggest a film, or if you want a play or a book that has helped you see the world in a different way and that others might value to teach them something about the world according to someone else's position. I really have waffled now. I think I'm going to pour myself a coffee and bid you a good few days, and I shall catch up again on Sunday. Take care. God bless.